My dad stole my $30,000 savings to fund his wife's boutique and laughed at my dreams. So I exposed their fraud, took revenge, and reclaimed my future. Hi, I'm a 24-year-old woman who's been saving up since I was 16 for one thing, my dream postgraduate program abroad. Growing up, I worked part-time jobs, skipped unnecessary spending, and even tutored kids in my neighborhood to build that savings account. I wasn't just saving money, I was building a future I could be proud of. To backtrack a bit, my parents divorced when I was 14 after my dad had an affair. It wasn't just some fleeting mistake. He left my mom for Sandra, who's now 34. Sandra has always given off a vibe that she's all about appearances. Flashy jewelry, designer bags, constant Instagram posts about manifesting her dream life. I can't say we've ever clicked, but she and my dad seemed happy, so I mostly kept my distance. When I opened my savings account at 16, my dad had to co-sign because I was still a minor. He didn't contribute a dime to the account. It was all my hard-earned money. The arrangement stayed even after I turned 18 because I didn't think to update it. I trusted him despite our rocky relationship. He's my dad after all. Fast forward to a few months ago, I got the acceptance letter of my dreams. A top-tier university abroad had offered me a spot in their prestigious program. I was over the moon, and so was my mom. She's been my rock since the divorce, always cheering me on and supporting me. My dad gave me a congratulatory nod and quickly shifted the conversation to how busy he'd been helping Sandra open her new boutique. Typical. Things started unraveling when I tried to pay the deposit for my program. I logged into my bank account only to see a number that didn't make sense. My balance wasn't just low, it was nearly wiped out, almost $30,000 gone. I thought it was some kind of mistake or fraud. I called the bank immediately, panicking. But what they told me knocked the wind out of me. The transactions were all legal and authorized by my dad, the co-signer on the account. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He said he borrowed the money to help Sandra launch her boutique, promising to pay it back someday. Someday. This wasn't some spare cash lying around. It was my future, my years of sacrifices, my ticket to a better life. He brushed it off like it was no big deal, acting like I was overreacting. Sandra's reaction was worse. She had the nerve to tell me it was family money and that I was too young to need it anyway. She actually smirked as she said it, like I should be grateful she even bothered to explain herself. I didn't even have words. All I knew was that I couldn't let this slide. My mom, of course, was livid. She offered to loan me as much as she could, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover everything. Legal action crossed my mind, but I quickly realized that fighting my dad in court would cost me more money and time than I had. Plus, with him technically having co-signing rights, it would be a murky battle. I felt stuck until I noticed something about Sandra that sparked an idea. Sandra is obsessed with her boutique and her image. She's constantly posting online about her entrepreneurial journey, showcasing overpriced items and giving motivational talks about building a brand. It's like she lives for the attention. That's when it hit me. If they thought they could take my money and get away with it, they were sorely mistaken. If legal action wasn't an option, I'd find another way to make them pay. I started digging into Sandra's business. Late nights spent scrolling through her social media, searching public records and reading between the lines of her posts revealed cracks in her perfect facade. Questionable permits, shady product sources. Let's just say they didn't seem above board. I took notes on everything. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became. At the same time, I looped in two of my best friends. One of them works in social media marketing, and the other is a tech genius who loves uncovering loopholes. When I explained what happened, they didn't hesitate to join in. We started brainstorming a plan, not just to expose Sandra's shady dealings, but to hit her where it hurt most, her boutique's reputation. As I gathered intel and crafted my strategy, I could feel my resolve hardening. They had underestimated me, assuming I'd cry and accept their empty promises. But I wasn't going to let them turn my dream into their safety net. The boutique's grand opening was coming up, and I knew I had to make my first move before then. Sandra and my dad had no idea what was coming. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them treat my hard work like their personal piggy bank. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about proving that I wasn't someone they could walk over. I didn't waste any time after the devastating discovery about my savings. While my dad and Sandra were busy with their so-called new life, I started digging deeper into Sandra's boutique. Her business had this image: glamorous, high-end, and exclusive. But when I really started looking, things didn't add up. I found out that she had cut corners on everything from permits to product sourcing. She didn't have the licenses to run the boutique legally, and many of her designs were stolen from independent creators. I could already hear the law knocking at her door. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I knew that if I wanted to hit her where it hurt, I needed to go straight to the source, the authorities. I put together everything I could, photos, documents, even some of her social media posts that were too good to be true. I filed an anonymous tip to the local business regulatory body. A few weeks later, I got confirmation that they were sending inspectors. It didn't take long before I started hearing whispers that Sandra's boutique would be shut down for permit violations. The grand opening was only a few days away, and I had a plan. I got my friends involved. They were just as eager to help me out. One was a social media expert, and the other had a knack for online reviews. They flooded her boutique pages with fake reviews, scathing ones. We made them sound real, like disgruntled customers who'd bought products that didn't live up to the hype. The reviews piled up quickly. Sandra was about to find out the hard way what happens when you mess with people's lives. The day of the grand opening arrived. Sandra, my dad, and a bunch of influencers were all there, hyping up the event. But what they didn't know was that the authorities had already set up shop. As soon as the doors opened, inspectors marched in, followed by a camera crew. I was there too, casually filming everything. My heart was pounding, but I didn't care. This was my moment. The boutique was shut down right then and there in front of everyone. I could barely hold back a smirk as I filmed Sandra's reaction. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. My dad tried to intervene, but it was too late. The damage was done. Word spread fast. By the time the day ended, everyone in town knew what had happened. Sandra's so-called perfect business had crumbled in front of her eyes. The next day, her social media was flooded with people laughing at her, calling her out for being a fraud. I didn't just want to hurt her. I wanted to make sure she never looked at me the same way again. I'd been the victim in this story for too long. Now it was my turn to take control. Sandra tried to play it cool on social media, claiming the haters were jealous of her success. She posted photos of herself in front of her boutique, pretending like the shutdown was just a minor inconvenience. But the comment section told a different story. People were calling her out, posting screenshots of her unlicensed products and questioning her entire business model. She kept doubling down, blaming everything on jealousy and bad luck, but no one was buying it. Meanwhile, my dad was furious with me. He called me up, his voice trembling with anger. He couldn't understand why I'd done this to his new life. I stayed calm and told him I had no idea what he was talking about. I wasn't going to admit to anything, especially not after what he'd done to me. He threatened to cut me off completely, but at that point, I couldn't care less. I had no intention of going back to him after what he did. Sandra's boutique was on the fast track to failure, and it felt good knowing I had a hand in it. Sandra didn't give up that easily. She quickly shifted gears and tried to pivot her boutique to online sales. It was a desperate move, but it was the only option she had left. She started advertising heavily on social media, trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. But I wasn't done yet. I kept digging into her financials, finding more and more shady dealings. She wasn't just cutting corners with permits. She'd made fraudulent claims to secure loans for her business, misrepresenting her income and assets to get more money from lenders. I had all the evidence I needed, and I sent it all off anonymously to the banks and lenders she'd worked with. Within a few days, they launched their own investigations into her business dealings. Sandra's desperation grew as she realized the walls were closing in on her. My dad, of course, didn't have a clue. He was still trying to support her, but even he couldn't ignore the growing pressure from creditors. Sandra's financial troubles were becoming harder to hide. She started selling off personal items, furniture, jewelry, anything she could get her hands on to cover her debts. It wasn't enough, but it was a sign that things were starting to fall apart. The first taste of victory came when I saw Sandra's public meltdown. She posted a tearful video on social media blaming everyone but herself for her troubles. She called it karma, but no one was feeling sorry for her. The backlash was brutal. People had already turned on her, and it wasn't just customers anymore. It was everyone who had ever heard of her boutique. My plan was working. Slowly but surely, Sandra was losing everything. My dad, too, was feeling the heat. It wasn't just Sandra who was drowning. It was their entire little empire, and I was just getting started. Sandra's boutique didn't just collapse overnight. As much as I enjoyed watching her empire crumble, it was only the beginning. While her shop floundered, my dad was left scrambling to keep things afloat. He had already sunk a ton of money into her business, and now he was borrowing from anyone who would lend him a dime. The strain was obvious. He wasn't answering my calls, and whenever he did, his voice was tight, almost desperate. Sandra was his new life now, and he was doing everything he could to protect her and her failing business. He never mentioned my savings again, though. He knew better than to go down that road. Meanwhile, I continued to work behind the scenes, making sure Sandra's situation didn't improve. The pressure on her was growing by the day. Her creditors were closing in, demanding money, threatening lawsuits, and ruining whatever was left of her reputation. Sandra, of course, didn't take this well. She turned to social media, posting constant updates about jealous people trying to destroy her and claiming she would rise above it all. But every post made her look more delusional, more desperate. I wasn't satisfied with just ruining her online presence. I wanted to make sure everyone in the community knew what she was doing. I started sharing details of her financial mess on local gossip pages, stirring up more attention. It worked. People in town began to avoid her, and the scandal was no longer just about a failed boutique. It became about Sandra herself. At home, things weren't any better. I overheard them arguing one night. She was furious that he couldn't keep her boutique alive and blamed him for not being a real partner. He was trying to explain his financial limitations, but she wasn't having it. The argument went on for hours, and the next day, I overheard one of my dad's coworkers asking him if he was okay, hinting that the gossip about his wife's scandal was starting to affect his professional reputation. My dad, normally a reserved person, had become the subject of office chatter. I didn't feel bad for him at all. He had chosen this path after all. Sandra wasn't about to let things go down quietly. Desperation set in. She started selling off items from her own home, things my dad had bought for her over the years, just to keep the boutique running. I saw pictures of her selling jewelry, expensive furniture, even a few things that had been family heirlooms. I can only imagine how my dad felt watching her unload things that were once meant for a future together. If he had any inkling of regret, he didn't show it. All I saw was a man slowly being consumed by the very woman he'd chosen over his family. The blows just kept coming. One night, my tech-savvy friend uncovered something interesting. Sandra had secret bank accounts. It turned out she'd been hiding money away from the authorities and her creditors, trying to avoid paying her debts. As soon as I got the information, I knew what I had to do. I contacted the authorities anonymously, providing them with the evidence and making sure they knew about her hidden funds. A few weeks later, I found out that those accounts had been partially frozen. Sandra's financial web was beginning to unravel in front of her eyes. She had no idea who was behind it, but I didn't care. All that mattered was that I was getting closer to my goal. Things came to a head when Sandra posted another one of her dramatic rants online. This time, she didn't just blame haters. She blamed vindictive people who were trying to ruin her life. But she was going to stay strong and keep fighting. Watching her spiral like that was both satisfying and unsettling. The walls were closing in on her, and she didn't even realize it yet. Sandra's breakdown wasn't just personal, it was public. It was only a matter of time before everyone saw her for the fraud she truly was. That's when my dad finally started questioning his choices. He called me one night, a little quieter than usual. It wasn't an apology, but it was a crack in the armor. He was beginning to see how much he had sacrificed for Sandra and how little it had paid off. He asked me to meet him in person, and despite everything, I agreed. I knew exactly what he was going to say, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him. When we sat down, he didn't start with the usual excuses. He just looked at me, his face tired, and said, "I know I messed up. I'll pay you back. Just don't do anything more." He was offering me a portion of my savings back. It wasn't a bad offer, and I could have taken it, but I wasn't interested in half measures. I looked at him and said, "I'm not taking partial repayment. I want everything back, and I want you to admit what you did." There was a long pause. His face changed, but I stood firm. I wasn't going to let him get away with what he'd done, not after everything I'd been through. My dad didn't like it, but I wasn't backing down. I didn't care about his guilt or his promises anymore. He had to make things right, or I would continue my plan to make Sandra and him pay for everything they had stolen from me. Things started to really heat up for Sandra when investigators uncovered that she had used falsified income statements to secure loans for her boutique. The news hit the local papers, and suddenly Sandra wasn't just a struggling business owner, she was a criminal. The headlines read like a nightmare: "Local boutique owner caught in fraud scandal." It wasn't long before the news reached even the most distant corners of our small town. People who had once supported her or thought she was just a victim of bad luck now saw the truth. The sympathy she had been trying to build crumbled faster than her boutique. Sandra, of course, wasn't taking this well, but instead of facing the reality of her actions, she doubled down, turning into a manipulative mess. She started telling everyone, family, friends, anyone who would listen, that it wasn't her fault. The reason everything had fallen apart was because my dad hadn't supported her dreams enough. According to her, if he had just believed in her more, she wouldn't be in this mess. The gall she had to blame him after everything he'd done for her was mind-blowing. But my dad, now humiliated, was slowly distancing himself from her. He hadn't fully cut her off yet, but it was clear their relationship was on the rocks. Meanwhile, Sandra's social circle started shrinking fast. Her friends and business associates dropped her like a hot potato, not wanting to be associated with her criminal activity. Even some of her so-called supporters started distancing themselves when they realized they might be dragged into the mess. It didn't take long for the cracks in her perfect image to become a full-on chasm. I knew I had to keep the pressure on. I gathered more evidence, pointing out her fraudulent practices to the lenders and local authorities. It felt good to watch everything she had built based on lies begin to unravel. Just when it seemed like Sandra couldn't get any deeper into trouble, her failure to report income from side hustles triggered a tax audit. The results were as bad as I expected: massive fines and penalties for not declaring income from her other business dealings. Sandra, once the queen of the local fashion scene, was now a convicted fraudster, and everyone knew it. But it didn't stop there. As her financial collapse continued, my dad's situation became more dire. He'd maxed out his credit cards to try to keep her business afloat. He was selling off personal assets just to make ends meet. He was running out of options, and it wasn't just his own financial security at risk anymore. It was his relationship with Sandra, too. Sandra wasn't done fighting yet. In a last-ditch attempt to salvage whatever she could, she pressured my dad to dip into his retirement savings. This was the breaking point for him. He snapped. For the first time in ages, he refused her. He wasn't going to sacrifice his future for her anymore. And that's when the real cracks started to show. The people who had initially supported my dad and Sandra now saw the mess they had created. Family members who had stood by them during the good times started turning their backs as more and more scandals came to light. What had once seemed like a perfect fairy tale turned into a soap opera of greed, lies, and betrayal. By now I had a moral dilemma. I'd gotten what I wanted. Sandra was exposed, and my dad was facing the consequences of his actions. I could have stepped back, let them clean up the mess, and moved on. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't done with them yet. I'd spent too many years working hard, saving and sacrificing for my dream. My money was still gone, and I wasn't going to let them walk away from this scot-free. I decided to push forward and continue holding Sandra and my dad accountable. They had to pay for what they did. As if the situation wasn't chaotic enough, Sandra had a public meltdown. She live-streamed a tearful rant on social media, blaming everyone but herself for her downfall. She called out vindictive people who had ruined her life, completely ignoring the fact that it was her own actions that had led to this moment. The live stream went viral, but not in the way she expected. People weren't feeling sorry for her, they were mocking her. The comments were brutal. People called her out for her lies, her manipulations, and her extravagant lifestyle. It was a full-on social media disaster. At the same time, the legal pressure on Sandra grew. Her creditors filed lawsuits. And because of the way she'd dragged my dad into her financial mess, he was also getting pulled into the legal chaos. His once stable life had completely imploded. As if that wasn't enough, I discovered even more dirt. My dad had known about Sandra's fraudulent actions long before he admitted to it. I found evidence showing he'd been complicit in covering up her lies. That was the final nail in the coffin. My leverage over him grew, and I knew I had him cornered. Eventually, my dad reached out to me again. This time, he didn't offer me a portion of my money. He offered me the full $30,000, finally, but it came with a catch. He wanted me to stop the legal action and drop the whole thing. He didn't care about admitting fault, he just wanted the mess to go away. But I wasn't about to back down now. I told him I would take the money, but only if he signed a written agreement. He had to promise never to touch my finances again, and he had to publicly admit his mistakes to the family. It was the only way I'd let him off the hook. This was far from over, but it was getting closer. Sandra was crumbling. My dad was facing the consequences of his choices, and I was finally getting what I was owed. Sandra's downfall was swift and unforgiving. After all the investigations and lawsuits, the inevitable finally happened. Her boutique was officially shut down. Authorities seized everything they could to cover her mounting debts. Her once pristine store, filled with overpriced knockoffs and fraudulent products, was now just a shell, the empty shelves serving as a symbol of her greed and deception. It was almost poetic how quickly it all fell apart for her. As for my dad, his world came crashing down along with hers. With Sandra gone, he was left to face the full extent of his mistakes. The fallout was immediate. Family members who had once supported my dad and Sandra started to distance themselves. The whispers about his involvement in everything grew louder. It was impossible for him to ignore anymore. Even though Sandra had been the mastermind, everyone knew my dad had enabled her behavior. He He had sacrificed his relationship with me and almost everything else for her, and now it had cost him dearly. The isolation was crushing. He was a man without allies, no longer respected in the family, and his own mistakes had turned him into a cautionary tale. But for me, the opposite happened. My mom, along with the rest of my extended family, rallied around me. They recognized my persistence and independence throughout this entire ordeal. They praised me for standing up for what was right and for refusing to let my hard-earned savings slip through my fingers. It was bittersweet. On one hand, I had the support I'd always wanted, but on the other, the damage had already been done. My relationship with my dad would never be the same. When Sandra left town, it was almost a relief. She filed for bankruptcy, disappearing from the public eye to escape her debts. My dad was left to deal with the aftermath alone, and I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction. For all his attempts to protect her, she had abandoned him just like everyone else. She wasn't even around to witness his downfall. I'm sure she saw it coming, but that didn't make it any easier for him. A few weeks after Sandra's departure, I received an email from my dad. He finally admitted his mistakes. He apologized for betraying my trust, acknowledging the pain he had caused. The email wasn't long, but it hit hard. He expressed his regret for enabling Sandra and for putting her over his own daughter, but by then, I wasn't sure if his apology was enough. He had hurt me deeply, and it wasn't something that could be fixed with a few words on a screen. Despite the apology, I couldn't forget everything that had happened. A part of me still resented him for everything I had to go through. In the weeks that followed, my dad wired me the full $30,000 he owed me, as promised. It wasn't an easy payment for him. His financial struggles were far from over. He was buried in debts, some of which he could never pay back. It felt like a hollow victory knowing that my money had come at the cost of his financial ruin. But I had gotten what I needed. That was the end of the chapter with him. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Just when I thought everything was settling down, Sandra resurfaced. She tried to reach out to my dad again, probably hoping to worm her way back into his life. But this time, he had learned his lesson. He blocked her on every platform, refusing to let her back into his life. It was a small act of redemption, but it was the first time in a long while that I saw him take control of something. While Sandra faded into the background, the legal cleanup continued. She faced a suspended sentence and hefty fines for her fraudulent activities. It was a small comfort, knowing she wouldn't be able to get away without consequences. But even with her out of the picture, my dad's reputation remained tainted. People in the neighborhood and at work started whispering about the scandal. They couldn't ignore what had happened, and my dad had to live with the shame of it all. I don't think he ever fully came to terms with what he'd lost, but I had moved on. After months of dealing with the fallout, I finally had the funds I needed to pursue my postgraduate program abroad. I packed my bags, leaving everything behind. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. My dream was within reach, and nothing could hold me back. My journey wasn't just about education anymore. It was about reclaiming what was mine and finding my own path away from the mess my dad had created. Just when I thought I was free of Sandra's influence, she took one last swing at me. She posted a cryptic social media message clearly aimed at me, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in her life. It didn't take long for the online community to call her out. They saw her for who she really was, a manipulative liar who had taken advantage of everyone around her. The comments were brutal, and Sandra quickly deleted the post, but the damage was done. She had become a cautionary tale of greed, and it was clear that no one felt sorry for her. As for my dad, he tried to rebuild his relationships with other family members. Some people were willing to forgive him, but I remained cautious. The damage was too deep, and I couldn't forget how easily he had chosen Sandra over me. I couldn't just pretend everything was okay. So I moved abroad to start my program. It was a new beginning, a fresh start that I had worked so hard to achieve. I promised myself that I would never again let anyone, even family, have access to my finances. No one would ever take advantage of me again. The lessons I had learned were painful, but they made me stronger. I was ready for whatever the future held. Months had passed since Sandra's downfall, and just when I thought I could finally put everything behind me, she resurfaced. This time, she wasn't trying to relaunch her boutique in the traditional sense. No, she decided to go digital, starting an online store under a completely different name. She had clearly thought that a fresh start with a fake ID would be her ticket back into the business world. But Sandra wasn't as clever as she thought. One of my tech-savvy friends, who had been following her every move, uncovered the new store almost immediately. The second she launched it, we found out who she really was. Her past scandals were just a click away from coming back to haunt her. The community didn't take too kindly to her latest attempt to sneak back into the market. News outlets quickly picked up on her new venture and started digging into her past. Articles popped up exposing her fraudulent history, and soon enough the whole town knew that the woman behind this new online store was the same one who had run a scam years ago. Former customers who had been burned by her before were quick to leave scathing reviews. Her creditors also piled on, warning others about her shady business practices. The backlash was overwhelming. Within days, her new store was shut down again, this time for good. Karma doesn't forget, and Sandra was paying the price. Amid all of this, my dad tried once again to redeem himself. He contacted me and offered to help fund my next semester abroad. He seemed genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't in a place where I could just forgive and forget. I had my own life to rebuild, and I couldn't risk letting him back in without setting some serious boundaries. I accepted his offer, but with a clear understanding there would be no further financial entanglements. I told him I would only accept his help under one condition: he would never again have access to my finances. If he truly wanted to help me, he would need to respect my independence. There was no room for him to make the same mistakes again. Sandra wasn't done trying to ruin people's lives just yet. After her online venture crashed, she tried suing a creditor for defamation. She claimed that the negative reviews and public backlash were all part of a conspiracy to bring her down. The lawsuit made headlines, but it quickly fell apart in court. Sandra lost the case, and her attempt to shift blame only further cemented her reputation as a manipulative, dishonest person. It was almost comical how far she was willing to go to play the victim when everyone could see through her lies. With the legal battle over, Sandra had no choice but to retreat further into the shadows, and once again she disappeared from the public eye. As for me, I was finally able to reconnect with the supportive relatives who had stuck by me through the entire mess. I shared my story with them, and they were amazed at how far I'd come. They saw my resilience and the way I'd handled everything with grace and strength. I didn't just survive, I thrived. The experience taught me the importance of setting boundaries and taking control of my own future. No one, not even family, could take that from me. I threw myself into my studies and started excelling. My professors took notice of my dedication, and I soon landed an internship with a well-known company in my field. It felt like everything was falling into place. What had once been a dream was now becoming my reality. I'd spent years working toward this, and now that I had the opportunity, I was determined to make the most of it. My dad continued to try to rebuild his relationship with me, but I remained cautious. I didn't trust that he had truly changed. Even though he made efforts to reach out, our relationship was still distant. It was clear that he had a long way to go before he could regain any trust. In the meantime, I focused on my own growth. I was building a life on my terms, and it felt good to be in control for the first time in a long while. Sandra, on the other hand, was slowly disappearing from the online world. After her last public meltdown and legal loss, her social media account started to vanish. It was like she was retreating into obscurity, no longer able to handle the relentless mockery she received. It was satisfying knowing that the internet had finally caught up to her, but honestly, I didn't care. Sandra's downfall had been a hard one, and I was no longer interested in watching her fail. My focus had shifted to something far more important: my own success. One day, as I was visiting my hometown during a break from school, I spotted Sandra. She looked disheveled, a far cry from the woman she used to be. I had a moment where I thought about confronting her, maybe giving her a piece of my mind, but I quickly realized that I didn't need to. Sandra had already lost everything, and I wasn't going to waste my time on her anymore. She wasn't worth my energy. As I walked away, I reflected on everything I had been through. Standing up for myself had not only secured my future, but had also shown me who truly supported me and who didn't. My dad, for all his flaws, was still my father, and I hoped in time he could rebuild what he had lost. But I knew that for me, the chapter with him was closed. I was moving forward, no longer burdened by the past. The lessons I had learned through this ordeal would stay with me forever. I was stronger, wiser, and more independent than I had ever been. With my studies on track, an internship under my belt, and a newfound confidence, I knew that the future was mine to shape. The book on Sandra and my dad's mistakes was closed, and I was ready to open the next chapter of my life. Sometimes, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I feel the sting of what happened, a quiet hurt that lingers like a bruise that hasn't fully healed. I don't hate my dad, but I can't erase the betrayal, the way he chose someone else's dreams over mine without a second thought. There's a part of me that grieves the father I thought he was, the one I believed would always have my back. But there's also a fire in me now, forged from the pain and the fight to take back what was mine. I'm proud of the woman I've become, someone who didn't crumble, who turned anger and loss into strength and action. Every step I take in my program, every achievement I earn, feels like a victory not just over Sandra's greed or my dad's mistakes, but over the version of myself that once trusted too easily. I've learned to guard my dreams fiercely, to build a life that no one can take away. And while the scars of this ordeal will always be there, they remind me of my resilience, my ability to rise above